don't see Mark yet. So hopefully he'll be here. Otherwise, we'll get an hour back of our agenda. That will help. So welcome to the November meeting of the Climate Change, Energy, and Environment Commission, C2E2. This is an open public meeting. It's being recorded. We will introduce, everyone will get a chance to introduce themselves. But after that, only commissioners, and then we'll have an opportunity for public comment. So anybody who would like to make a public comment, let us know in the chat. But after that, only commissioners can speak. And with that, this is all virtual, so we don't have to go around the table. We can actually see people. So I'll just call on people to introduce us. So I'm Cindy Lewin, I'm the chair of C2E2. I'm just gonna go across the rows. So Demetra, I see you next on my screen.
Demetra McBride, Bureau Chief of the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management through December 14th of this year. That's my last day, but happy to see everybody.
Yes, I was going to make that point, and here we are in a virtual meeting. I'm offering only virtual cupcakes to wish you the very best on your next in Florida on your next exciting, wonderful. So, but you will be very much missed.
My thighs and my bum are very happy to have your virtual cupcakes. Thank you.
Jenna, I see you next.
Thank you. We'll cut that out of the recording. Jenna Peabody, Air Team, part of OSUM. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenna. Rob?
Yeah, hi, Rob Sandoli, Commissioner.
And Melissa?
Hi, Melissa Ben, Commissioner.
Jamie?
Jamie Kern, Arlington resident, interested in joining the commission at some point.
Scott?
Hi, everybody. Scott Dickey. I'm on the Arlington Energy Committee.
Welcome. Lisa Marcellus?
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Marcellus. I'm a guest this evening. I applied to the commission last week and figured I'd introduce myself for your consideration. I was on the Environmental Advisory Board in my hometown some years ago, moved to Arlington in 2021. Currently work at IBM, where I'm a consultant. My client for the past few years has been the United States Air Force, and I'm currently an environmental analyst for them. So thanks for having me. Excited to listen in tonight.
Great, Lisa. And welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, excuse me, Jonathan Morgenstein. I'm a commissioner. I'm also on the Energy Committee.
Wonderful. And I see Rich next.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Rich Dooley, Director of Climate Policy in the county's Climate Policy Office. Thanks.
Wonderful. And Doug.
I'm Doug Snowinboss. I'm a commissioner and chair of the Energy Committee.
Jennifer. Thank you, Doug.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Fioretti, Assistant County Manager for Climate Policy in the Climate Policy Office.
Thank you. And Trevor?
Trevor Montano, Commissioner.
Joan?
Joan Maher, Commissioner and Vice Chair.
And Joe?
Joe Tourette, Commissioner.
Great. Well, I think that is everybody. But am I wrong? Is there anybody who hasn't had a chance to introduce themselves? Okay. And I'm using someone else's computer, so I'm not seeing all of you. On my computer, I see more people at once. So feel free to shout out since I'm not going to see you all at the same time. Would anybody like to make a public comment? We didn't receive any in writing. Jamie, so you have 3 minutes. So let me get my phone and you may start when you wish.
Thanks. 2 points that are kind of aligned. So I understand there's discussion on Arlington Green Building type of initiative. And I just wanted to say that, so I work for the EU delegation, European Union in DC, and in the 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be coming out with a transatlantic program that's partnering subnational governments in the US with subnational governments in Europe to advance energy efficient building renovations of existing stock. And it would be wonderful if Arlington had an interest for them to play a role, a participant in this fully funded multi-year exchange that's to help these different jurisdictions at different levels to advance their ambitions towards energy efficient renovations, emissions reductions, billing reductions for residents and small businesses. I can provide more information in 3 weeks, but I just want you to, if you're going to propose anything to the council, to keep in mind that it is this is something that's upcoming. I see a chat note. Fully funded means that the European Commission, actually the EU delegation here in DC, is putting forward several $1 million to 3 initiatives, this being one of them, to partner to build like a transatlantic community of practice among policymakers across the US and across Europe to advance several common goals. The one I'm just talking about now is specifically energy efficient building renovations, but there are 2 other priority areas of the EU in the US. And then along those lines, I was talking with Cindy this afternoon, and it's great that Arlington is ambitious and is going to be a leader. And I just wanted to suggest, if it hasn't already been done, or if there's an opportunity to reach out to other counties in Northern Virginia, because it's often the case that when you're setting regulations, you compete with your neighboring jurisdictions, and it's like a race to the bottom for who can get the companies to develop in your jurisdiction. But if everybody's on the same page, then it's a race to the top. And how can we motivate all the companies who are doing business in the area to achieve the highest levels of ambition when it comes to emissions reductions, energy reductions, et cetera. And I was just talking with her about the opportunity of Northern Virginia to be a partner in this program I'm talking about for the next 4 years. And it could be sort of a regional branding of buildings, not LEED, because LEED is an industry organization, but something specific to the region, saying that Northern Virginia is the destination of the future for energy consumption, for low energy bills, for emissions reductions as these become more popular. I was teasing the name of something like a supernova brand, but I don't know whether people would appreciate that or not. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity for that. And I just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you. Wow. 2 seconds. Boom.
Can I say
Okay.
something really quick?
Yes, Demetra, I was
Cindy,
going to call on you. Yes.
oh,
And
sorry.
I'm sorry, Jamie, that I was texting with our speaker who's struggling to get into Teams. Where have I heard that before? Demetra, back to you.
Hi, Jamie, really quickly. If I know that Cindy probably has your contact information.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to make an introduction before I leave on December 14th between you and Paul Roman of the AIR team. He just got his master's in sustainable architecture and building design. He came to us from Gensler. He's really just quite exceptional. And I think that he would be very, very interested in speaking with you about that initiative.
That'd be excellent. I appreciate that. I'm happy to put my email in the chat if that's okay with the organizers.
That's fine. I mean, it's being recorded. People can watch it. So it's not just us. It's like the entire, that incredible audience that is gripped by the C2E2 meetings and watches the full recording. But anyway, what's done is done. So Mark is still having trouble. So I'm going to give Jenna, I'm going to give you his phone number. But why don't we, since that's our big first thing, Joan, why don't we go to the next item, which is the master transportation update. And we'll hope that Mark can join us.
Yeah. Let's see, do I have permission to share the screen? I can just pull up the document I sent around yesterday and we can talk from there.
Yes, you should have permission.
Okay. Oh, I see. There's the share button. Why is it different every place else?
I love Teams. Have I mentioned that lately? Yes.
Yeah.
Happy to share as well, Joan, if you need.
Do I do share content?
Yep. And
Okay.
and usually it'll say what window you want to show.
Okay, let's see.
Yep, so right now we see your tabs open.
Yeah, just trying to.
And that is the C2E2 priorities. Okay. Yep.
Everybody see these? Okay, I'll make it a little bit larger. So as everybody knows, we've been sharing around for a while, is that the county is updating its master transportation plan. And I'm on their advisory committee with a number of other commissions. And so what they've just finished is the public engagement. And as part of that, they're asking for each of the commissions to actually weigh in with what their priorities and what they think should be in this master transportation plan. They gave us a number of questions. Just give a sense from the first meeting I attended to, this seemed to be much of the focus is consolidating what is currently now multiple plans with a kind of overview strategy and plans, but into one framework that would focus mostly on, figuring out, how to divide up the right of way, the roads and all that, to make, to meet, a variety of different transportation needs. But I think, from our perspective, we want to actually look a little bit broader. They always have a nod to environmental sustainability, but right now, the existing plan doesn't really include any real targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or even really, kind of targeting how do you get transportation down to zero greenhouse gas emissions in line with the county's plan. So anyway, if we just want to go through each question, and if each person has, if you kind of think, a lot of this I've just pulled from a lot of stuff that we've done in the past, and kind of filled in. If we've got anything kind of more specific, if people have ideas and examples or something that provides some context in terms of how you kind of experience transportation in Arlington and what kinds of differences it would make that we can integrate, that's good as well. I got a few comments from Michaela a little earlier about, just the challenges of actually biking and getting around places.
Right. And Joan, when does this need to be turned in? It's
tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. So I won't say so. Right. So we'll think now.
So we want to kind of get through it and get it out. I mean, this is going to be probably close to a 2-year plan, but
so it will come back to.
It will. Yeah, we will be engaging multiple times throughout the process. I'll report back in December after our next meeting, and probably can be able to give a general sense of what direction they're taking, and if it's really doesn't really align with where we think it might be, we might want to be thinking about doing a letter kind of based on some of these comments, to go to the county board to kind of give them an early on heads up about, opportunities that may be lost in this process.
Right. Well, thank you for being our rep, and thank you for writing this. So this isn't going to need a vote, but it's thoughts, as you say, that you've gathered from conversations and other letters we've written. So keep going.
Okay. So, I mean, the first question is, how do we use the existing master transportation plan? And the reality is we don't really, because, we're looking at different perspectives of transportation in terms of how it relates to decarbonization and other goals. And a lot of those are in there, but again, they're fairly general terms, and we have weighed in on the transit plan, strategic plan that was adopted last year. But most of that, it does come in a little bit on SPRCs, but, again, that's getting way down into the weeds in terms of, kind of, do you need a crosswalk here? Do you need, what are the bike lanes sufficient? That type of thing. And Transportation Commission members are pretty much on top of that.
Right. Okay, so keep scrolling because I know we have limited time.
Okay, so and I think this one is really the crucial one, because what our priorities are. So really kind of started to focus is first is let's make this a quantitative, measurable transportation plan that really sets meaningful targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Yes.
So and decarbonization, and one thing I've built into it, which hasn't been in the master transportation plan, but it is in the decarbonization of transportation plan, is actually shifting to electric and, you know, kind of getting away from using gasoline, CNG, or other fossil fuels in transportation. To see as that as a more comprehensive way of looking at transportation. Again, you know, we do have our targets of we need to be at 0 by 2050, and we need to make progress sooner rather than later.
Definitely.
Again, you know, crucial measures of, yeah, here I just thought was kind of, you know, throw something out is this 20%, and that actually came from an RMI study that's looked at it more nationally. I mean, we should be able to do much better because we actually have much better transit and other infrastructure to move much quicker. So
I know we've spent a lot of time talking about battery powered buses, and but have we talked, and when you talk about microtransit, have we talked about using smaller vehicles? I just see these huge buses all day long that have one person or 0 people.
Yeah, we can. I think that's implicit in the microtransit.
Yeah,
but we can be more specific. So that was in this section here.
Right, and I think I saw, yeah, the microtransit is where I brought it up.
Maybe. Is that, yeah. Except I should be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, they just need more flexibility in the system. And again, a lot of buses running around completely empty makes no sense. I mean, you know, you've got areas that are essentially underserved, but then the existing transportation through those areas are underutilized. So the smaller buses and more flexible routes. Again, we've on several occasions talked about the art buses.
Right.
In the schools. Haven't talked much about regional transportation, but obviously people in Arlington aren't staying in Arlington, and lots of people are coming to Arlington and going elsewhere in the region. So there needs to be a broader regional strategy, kind of aiming towards the same goals. On the walkability, bikeability, Michaela weighed in on this earlier today, but just saying is that, you know, her son goes to Arlington Tech, and from Bluemont, it's almost, you know, impossible for him to get a route that's safe all the way.
Right.
So really kind of, so if anybody's got any kind of examples or ways of talking about some of these things that make it a bit more personal, that's fine. That kind of can heighten what the bigger points are.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, micromobility. Yeah, and the micromobility, it's, you know, you've got all these scooters and e-bikes, and Michaela was mentioning that, you know, privately owned e-bikes and scooters have no restrictions on how fast they can go. So they're going down trails and other places, and, you know, makes it very dangerous for other people. So
yes.
Again, you know, when you've got all these different options, we need to figure out, you know, how they can all play together nicely. Yeah. And then the final one is kind of, and it's probably one of these ones that'll be constantly controversial because people hate to see parking being taken away. But again, if people have other options, they should be looking at, you know, how can they, kind of either increase parking or reduce the availability so it makes it even more attractive to use these options. But the options obviously have to be there to begin with.
Okay. Any comments from anyone? Do we have
Anything
a sense
missing?
that scooters and bikes should be on the sidewalk or be in the street?
I think it's probably more they should be in protected bike lanes, but even that, I mean, if you've got something going much faster than the average bike,
yes,
does it belong in there? So,
right.
So do you want to make, Joan, do you want to make the point, not so much that we're trying to focus on safety, which isn't our purview, it's really important, but
Yeah.
more that you've got to make, if you don't make those trails safe for the other non-emitting forms of transportation, like people walking, that you'll end up having a net loss really by having e-bikes going as fast as they want. So it's I think it's implicit in there, but we need to make the explicit point that in order to maximize these non-emitting forms of transportation, you got to make it safe for all users.
Yeah, I think so.
So John can add that offline.
Yeah.
But I have a message from Jenna saying that, and I saw the number of people go up. So I think, do we lose Mark? No, Mark is here.
Okay, well, I'll just put a comment on that to add just a fraction of.
Right.
Yeah, and this is Rob, Cindy. Yeah, I agree with that comment from Kevin. Yeah, we have to stay in our lane here, and I think tying the safety point to, advancing other forms of non-emitting transportation is the right framing. A quick question on vehicle miles traveled. I saw those in there as a target goal of a 20% reduction. Just a question do we have a way to measure that? Does the county measure that? Do we have a baseline for vehicle miles traveled, but per normalized for number of households?
I think they do. They have a combination of ways of getting, and maybe as we get in there, we can get some briefings from the transportation people to figure how they measure, because they do talk some about, how many people are using transit, some what they're seeing in terms of overall vehicle flows. So, and they do a lot of, kind of consumer or residential surveys to get things that I think, they can pull together statistically to get a sense. And imagine in some places they can just monitor every once in a while how many cars come down this Langston Boulevard or whatever on a given day.
Got it. Thank you.
So I think
for cars, there's also modeling of VMT in connection with the greenhouse gas inventory.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Which is going to be completed by the end of January.
So, anything else toward the bottom we should talk about?
Okay. Yeah. And then the final is some things on decarbonization. Again, we've kind of addressed all of these issues. Some of them are in the decarbonization of transportation plan.
So looks like decarbonization of transformation, but we'll clean it up.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then funding isn't a big issue, of course.
Yeah, no, all this is funding, behavior change. And the other is the kind of risk aversion is, it's for people who are used to running transit in a certain way, thinking differently, there's going to be a learning curve. There's going to be some, glitches, and there's going to need to be some experimentation. So this is just kind of a plea to have people to be more ambitious. And the opportunities, this is pulled almost entirely from our Vision 2050.
Right. So thank you so much, Joan, for pulling this together and for being our transportation liaison, because with the master transportation plan, that's going to be a very significant project. So thank you.
Okay. Have I stopped sharing or?
I I still see it, but
Okay.
there.
Okay.
Now
All
you
right.
have. And Mark, welcome after your odyssey. And thank you for sending around your notes earlier today. And we're really, just as a little background, Mark, who tracks all of our SPRC site plan review committee participation, has been thinking and watching all the projects go through and thinking about the areas where it's subjective, the areas where better projects and worse projects don't seem to get rated as necessarily. I think C2E2 was really in the advanced wave by coming up with a checklist for projects so that we had a level of objectivity, we had criteria established. Every commissioner had some basis for making our projects comparable. We've talked before about the fact that the county board members really look for our letters on these projects and really give them weight. I know I told you guys in September that Taka stopped by on the one project that we hadn't done because David Evans had to resign from the commission unexpectedly. And he came to see me and said, as I was waiting for our C2E2 meeting to start, and said, I looked and looked for your letter. I looked everywhere. I kept flipping through the whole book. I wanted to see what score you gave it. I had a guess of what score it would get, and I wanted to see what you gave it, and your letter wasn't there. And I was like, it's true. Our letter wasn't there. But, with that, it's just a reminder that people really do look at what C2E2 does. Vehicle miles traveled, Doug. Okay. So Mark, if I can turn it over to you. And thank you, Jenna, for whatever you did.
Mark, can you come off mute? Mark, you just need to, usually at the top of your screen or on a bar on your screen, there should be a microphone. And you would be able to, if you click on that, it'll unmute.
Well, while Mark, just break in when you can. But while we're doing that, why don't we go ahead and adopt the October meeting notes, which were circulated on Tuesday with a link. There were some comments back on Tuesday, which I think I just put in. I don't think there are any other comments, although I admit I didn't look today. But any comments on the October summary? If not, can I have a motion to approve them as submitted by Jenna?
So move.
Thank you, Kevin. And Kevin, you didn't get a chance to introduce yourself, but Kevin, I'm glad to see you.
Okay, sorry. I'm Kevin Vincent. Hi.
Hi, Commissioner. Yep. Okay, so we have a motion. May we have a second?
I second it.
Great. And all in favor?
Cindy, just one, I did make a comment as we didn't include the commissioners that weren't there.
Okay, so you added that.
I put a note that we should add that.
Okay, great. So as amended and shown on the Google Docs site, which as I said, I forgot to look at today. And by the way, I understand from Jenna that we are now under a new rule that for our attendance to count, we have to keep our cameras on. We talked about that that's not true of the members of the public, but it's true of the commissioners. We talked about that last summer when that rule was adopted. We weren't sure when it was going to take effect, but apparently it has taken effect, which will make it a lot easier to take this vote because now you can just do show of hands because now I can see you. So all in favor. Okay, now I have to turn the page so I can see everybody. Shout out if you're not. Hi, Mark. Shout out if you're not. Okay. I'm thinking that was good, and I'm going to mark that as approved. And Mark, are we able to hear you? I see you.
Can he hear us?
Mark, can you hear us? Wave your hand if you can hear us.
Mark can hear you.
He's
just having trouble with audio.
Right. Can we unmute him from our side?
I tried to unmute him and it doesn't seem to work.
Right. Maybe he could call in on the phone and just look on the screen. Yeah, he certainly talked in other meetings. So
It doesn't seem
He's
we're hearing
laughing.
him when he talks into his phone though, which is weird.
if he just, Jenna, if he just called in, we could show his slides and we could hear him and he could see the slides.
Yep, he's gonna call in.
Okay.
Isn't technology wonderful?
Okay, we're stopping staring at Mark. Has everybody had a chance to look at the Barcroft letter that Joan prepared? As a reminder, we had the Barcroft, Jair Lynch, developer representative, to talk about Barcroft, this very large affordable housing project renovation off Columbia Pike, which did not go through we heard that in October, did not go through the SPRC process because it's subject to the Columbia Pike form-based code. Thank you, Joan. And so to put our voices on the record, and since commissioners have been asking, board members have been asking what we think, Joan prepared this letter that talked about how, as planned, they're going well past what the form-based code goes for, and so that we support the project and really appreciate it. And Rob, thanks. I see your comments. I see a few of mine are still hanging out.
Yeah, no, I can accept.
Yeah, right. That's fine. So would anybody like to add anything about this letter?
So Cindy, yeah, I just corrected some minor typos, but the only comment that I put in toward the bottom was about the resilience of the building. Am I correct? Did they present that they currently can have the ability to operate as a microgrid now and it'd be completely off grid, and when they get done with this redevelopment, they will not have that capability? Is that?
You asked that question.
That was Rob.
Rob, I think Jenna, didn't she say they were already off? I think they've already entered into the agreement with Dominion and it may be live now. So they may be back as Dominion customers.
Yeah, I think my point was that, that it was actually good to have that resilience built in when it was originally constructed, and it'd be nice to have that ability again. So while they're very advanced in a lot of the other sustainability features and updates they're making, obviously compared to what's there now, it'd be great to not take a step backwards in their resilience, and that would just reinforce the point I think that Joan already made in the letter with adding solar and storage.
Integrating into a microgrid, yeah, and getting off the grid.
Or have the ability to do that, yeah.
It does have to be reconciled with the historic designation of the buildings as well. I know because we're dealing with the same thing in stormwater with Barcroft as well. So they did get historic district designation. So we're trying to figure out how far we can go with resiliency measures there without running sideways of that designation.
So maybe we can add something to, like, Joan, to add a sentence that says, we understand they've been a microgrid and we encourage them to remain a microgrid or continue to be a microgrid, so that since we're not exactly sure what their plans are, but we can reinforce that importance.
Okay.
Rob, does that work for you?
Mm-hmm. How about maybe?
Joan's got points in there to that effect already. Anyway, yeah, I don't feel that strongly. So.
Maybe here is when we talk about the resiliency is kind of restoring some of the resiliency of previous. I think I don't recall what the explanation was, and it was probably more technical than I needed, but there was something about the way the microgrid was set up that it really wasn't wasn't going to work with electrification.
Right. I remember that too.
And it was basically obsolete.
Yeah, Joan, I just want to clarify when we talk about it previously being a microgrid, it was simply that all of the T&D infrastructure within the boundary of Barcroft was owned by Barcroft, was owned by the owner. So the ownership has now essentially been turned back. It's not like they had their own generation. So there was, you know, clean electricity and they didn't have storage. And so it was just the infrastructure itself was owned by the developer owner.
Yeah, it wasn't clean electricity. I understood that they had backup generators for everything that they could operate islanded if they got cut off by the electric grid that they had.
Yeah, but those were diesel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so I can, you know, make some reference to restoring some of the resiliency of the past, or going beyond, or you know, improvement.
Yeah, I'm just saying, Joan, I'm not sure it's even accurate to call it resiliency before.
Okay.
Particularly if their backup was, you know, diesel generated.
Right.
It might be better to see if there are not opportunities now to pursue resiliency within the, particularly a low income community that is always facing greater, you know, public health challenges. So maybe if the backup generation can be cleaner, something of that nature, so that there's a health, you know, positive health impact to it as well.
How about if we approve the letter with the note that Joan and I will.
Hello?
Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, we're just wrapping up on Barcroft, and then we will turn it over to you, our featured speaker. But
Right.
so could I get a motion? Does anybody have other questions other than on this point with regard to this letter?
The only thing I just want to say is Demetra mentioned something about the historic preservation designation, and I'm not really sure how that would conflict with anything we were recommending. But to the extent there is any conflict, I'm happy to weigh in as a former chair of the HLRB. I kind of know that process, and it's got a lot more flexibility than perhaps they want to exercise. So I'm happy to try to see how we can have our cake and eat it too with historic preservation. If there's an actual conflict there, I'm not sure why there should be any at all.
I think one of the things they seemed to mention was how much they actually could do in terms of the exterior of the building. So that was one thing. And of course, then there's all the trees.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and we recognize that. So you can't put solar panels on everything.
Right.
Right,
Yeah,
so we
Joan's
might like
right.
to-
It's about the building envelope. And I don't pretend to know the exact, you know, code text or anything. Steve, Kevin, I think that you're on the right track though, just coordinating with historic preservation. That's what we're doing on stormwater.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. There's a purported conflict because again, there shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. And I know that is an area of real expertise that you bring. So thank you.
Yeah.
All
yeah.
right,
And
so
hopefully if they're talking to these, you know, passive house or other people, they'll figure out how to deal with maintaining the kind of the historic preservation elements and still, you know, enhancing and really making a much tighter envelope. Okay. So do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Rob.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
I see someone seconding. Okay, all in favor, raise your hand, and since I can't see you all, if you're voting against it, speak up. Okay, hearing no nays, any abstentions? I don't think anybody's here is involved with the Barcroft project. The letter is approved, and thank you again, Joan, very much for your work on that. We'll cut the echo, I think, once we all but Mark mutes himself, but I think Mark's using his phone. So with all the anticipation, let's turn it over to Mark. I think I already talked about the importance of the SPRC process, and I will go on mute. I think if we all do, then we'll cut the echo.
So are you getting an echo for me? Yeah. You are?
No, I
No.
think you're all set now.
Not anymore.
Okay. Okay. I actually am seeing myself on screen. So, and I really love Teams. Okay. Here's what I'd hope to do, and so I'll try to jump into it and hopefully start a conversation, because I think a lot of this would be improved by conversation, at least among you folks, and I can come in and out, I guess. What I wanted to do was give you some background on the methodology for the checklist. And you have to understand some of the details before we can really deal with some of the policy issues. I had sent around two documents, one of which was kind of a summary of some big themes. I'll touch on those things quickly, and then we can take a look at a spreadsheet that Jenna, I think, has and hopefully can post if people can't see it. I did send it around to everybody today, but I don't know how accessible that is. Well, look like it's there.
We see
That's
it.
good.
Thanks. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start with some of the basics. The key thing to understand about how the methodology works is there are 7 categories, which you can see as on the spreadsheet, kind of the blue lines. Green buildings, carbon reductions is one, energy efficiency, electrification, electric vehicle infrastructure, electricity from renewable sources, environmental sustainability, and social equity. Now, 6 of these categories have influence over 15% over the overall score. Okay? So 6 of them, 15% each. One more, the 7th one, has only influences 10%, and that's environmental sustainability. I have no idea why that was picked as the lesser of the 7, but it was. So in each category, then, you're looking at a set of subcategories. And they're used by the reviewers to rate, as we know, the site performance. So you have the possibility of falling short. That's the red category. You can meet your standards, or you can exceed expectations. Now, the way it works is if you fall short, you get 1 point. If you meet expectations, you get 2 points, and exceed expectations, 3 points. And that factors into the equations that are kind of behind all of this, the equations that are really key to things. But there's another part of this that ends up being kind of important, and that's essentially the weighting of these individual subcategories. And the way that works, essentially these subcategories, which there's in one case only 1 subcategory, in another one there's 5, but they essentially share the scoring that's at the category level. So what happens is it's a bit like if you think about the number of categories, think about it as, since this is Thanksgiving season, think about the category as essentially a pie. And each of these subcategories is like a slice of the pie. If you have more subcategories, that means that the individual slices of pie / subcategories get smaller. So you're going to find that when you look at the spreadsheet, that if you look in the column that is essentially over on the right side, that is right to the right of the gray line that goes up and down, you're going to see the weight of the individual subcategories. And as I said, the greater the number of subcategories, the smaller the number that you're going to see in that box. They're all splitting up 15%, except of course for environmental sustainability, which is splitting up 10%. Okay. And these become the important factors to figure out what the score is going to be. So the key thing about those is that they are embedded in the equations that underlie the methodology. They cannot be, at least in the current design of the spreadsheet, you can't influence those weights. So in contrast to what you see in the ability to modify the scores for the individual subcategories, where the reviewer essentially can modify it by picking falls short, meets expectations, or exceeds expectations. That's what the reviewer can influence. It can't influence these weights unless we redesign the spreadsheet. Okay? And the weights are going to become important later as we go through this. Just also noting, I think this is the case, I've asked this question a couple of times and I think it's right, is that in terms of the policy that underlies the scoring here, is that we consider an aggregate score or overall score of 70% being a good score. And if you are below that, you're getting a low score or a score that's not up to snuff. If anybody wants to disagree with that, let me know, but I think that's the case. Let's take a look then more detail on the spreadsheet. What you're looking at here, as I mentioned, what is to the left of that gray line is
Mark,
basically...
I think you have a question from Jonathan, so...
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think, and I could be very wrong on this, but whereas objectively 70 wouldn't be a fantastic score, it's really a lot to do with, right, like it's relative to the scores that we've seen. And we have not seen any in the 80s and 90s. Is that true? I mean, it's just, there's so few buildings that really push the envelope. And that's why a 70 or better is good. It's good compared to everything else we see, as opposed
Wasn't
to
it Amazon?
objectively.
Amazon had a really good score, right?
Amazon had a 90 score. 90 plus. It was like 93.
You know. Okay.
It's just
most of them
so
tend
rare.
to be in the low 60s.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's a fair point. We can, I guess, call it good or bad, or what one's better than the other. But what I see is that most of them are in the 50s or 60s, and that's not good enough, right?
Yeah, and I think that generally reflects our general sense on, the quality of these buildings in terms of especially decarbonization.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, and I guess the other thing on the chart is to the far right, I just gave a sense of how much of the scoring is associated with certain subject matters. Obviously, 15% at the top is for essentially the buildings and some of the carbon reductions. The middle category, of course, is energy, which makes up 60% of the overall scores that we evaluate. Environment is only 10%. And then we have the social equity one, which is worth 15%. And that's overall just a general picture. I wanted to get example of some of the nitty-gritty by taking a look at the environment category and then taking a look at one of the subcategories. It could be any one of them because it's all the same. The way I kind of put this together is that I put all of the ratings in the meets expectations, and that is associated in the overall score. When you get all of those in the same color, is they get a rating of 67%. Now, the question is, if you were to change that score at the subcategory level, would you make a big difference? In the environment one, you wouldn't, because if you moved to exceed expectations, for example, let's say on biophilia, as an example, sorry, you would find that the score doesn't change. It's the same. I think that has to do, I couldn't figure out why that was the case, because in most cases, when you go up a step, you get more points in the overall score. But it doesn't work there. I think it's because the weighting factor is so low in the environmental category. It's only 2. There's not much. And so that could be what's going on. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, when you go down to social equity, where you've got only one subcategory. So the subcategory is the category. And what you find there is that if you change the characterization, let's say it goes to the red category, goes down, you find that there is a significant change. It goes from 67% down to 62. So it's 5 points lower. And on the other end, going from 67, you go to the exceed expectations, it goes up to 72. So it is actually making a difference. But in the case, again, of the environmental stuff, you've got a lot of subcategories, which means that the actual weighting factor gets low. And so I think that's part of the reason that occurs. And I guess what I wanted to at least raise as an issue, and this is part of opening up the idea of a discussion, is that if we want to add more categories, subcategories, let's say, to this checklist over time, let's say we want to add something for extreme heat. Well, that would probably go as a subcategory in environmental sustainability, I think, unless we restructure this. But what that does, unfortunately, is counterproductive, because as we add additional subcategories, we are reducing the weight of these individual subcategories, not only for the one that's added, but for all the other ones that are in the set. So that kind of gets to be counterproductive a bit. And I think that's kind of one of the issues. And this could also happen, I think, in some of the climate and carbon reduction things too, if we add those too. And it raises some questions about whether when you are going to add things, you should take a look at dealing with the weighting per se. There's nothing magical in the weighting that it has to be split evenly among all of the subcategories. You could actually include a weighting factor in the individual cells for the subcategories. So that would be something that maybe we want to think about, because not necessarily are they all the same, even when they're in the same category. Some are more significant potentially, and so that could be done as a correction. But that is kind of the nature of the beast, and this is kind of the overview I wanted to provide. To me, the big issue here is whether we have the right balance among the factors we've got here. And obviously there are big differences in the overall amount of energy versus everything else. I'd still wonder why environment was only 10%. So there are those kinds of issues that I think warrant some discussion. And then I think this methodology of how we essentially establish the weight of the individual subcategories is, at least for me, a question about perhaps we want to make this a little more conscious and not just an artifact of how many subcategories end up under a umbrella category title, which is the way it is now, and which is pretty artificial, and I think can kind of distort a little bit about what we're potentially trying to do. Well, let me stop there. This is a time for questions.
Well, I think it's great to look at the checklist. I think that, and I know that when we unmute, we'll have echo, and that just, we have to accept that for this conversation. You know, the other question which you are raising, Mark, is should there be other things added? Do we have the right things? We know we're going to be updating this when the new green building incentive policy is shaped and ready, because we'll want to reflect new changes there. So that's, you know, so I think it's a two-part question. One is, what else do we need? Or is there anything on here we want to get rid of? And then how do we weight what we end up with? But I see a lot of people's comments. So Joan, you've got your hand up first. I'll go to you. And I'll re-mute, which.
Yeah, just for background is when we did this, the kind of meets was largely tied to the existing what the current green building incentive policy is. So those participating in would generally get that meets, other than I think we were a bit more stringent when it came to electrification, and really kind of expecting that buildings were electrified or on some sort of pathway to electrification. And in most cases, those projects have filled below. In a general sense, I think the scoring actually does tend to respect if one thinks 60 is not all that good of a score. It kind of reflects the buildings that we've been seeing coming through the SPRC process. That said, I think the spreadsheet is pretty flawed. I think Mark has brought out a lot of the issues with it, and I think we might want to look a lot closer in terms of how we structure it and how we do it in a way that really kind of reflects what we think a good sustainable building is. And there's probably going to be different ways of going about doing that, and actually make it more transparent and make it easier actually for the commissioners, because in some cases it got to be difficult to figure out how you actually scored. So
right, again, some of it is subjective. So Mark, if you mute your phone in between when you're not talking, that might help. But Joe, I think I see your hand next.
Yes. I think the issue is that his computer sound is coming through his phone. So that's just a note there. So if he was turned on the volume on his computer, echo. But a technical question about the existing list. It states provide narrative addressing listed issues under biophilia. And I'm confused, like what are the listed issues?
I'm afraid I couldn't understand the question. I couldn't hear it really. Could you?
Mark, can you mute your computer? Just click on the I don't know, the sound icon at the bottom of your computer and press mute on that. It's usually next to the Wi-Fi. And just click mute on that since you're listening through your phone.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Is that better? It sounds better. No?
Joe, repeat your question and we'll find out if it's better.
Okay.
So under biophilia, it states provide narrative addressing listed issues. I'm wondering, like, what are the listed issues? I don't see them there.
I think that got compressed.
It must
also,
be
in some cases, you would go back to the original green building incentive policy and see what the criteria was.
Yeah. Take a look at the
Rob.
Yeah, thanks for this analysis and bringing this forward. I'd love to see an alternate proposal that weights things. We don't necessarily have to do this. We can get rid of the subcategories and just have the so we don't make this artificial reducing the weights based on the number of subcategories within a particular category. We can weight things directly with a list of 15 or 20 sustainability criteria. There's lots of different ways to slice and dice this. But I think it's best to kind of take it offline and figure out how we might want to weight it and come back with a couple of alternative proposals for which are most important and which we care about most. I also agree with the comment that yes, we might want to wait until the next green building incentive policy comes out so we know what is meets and what is exceeds. Thanks. Over.
I think that's I think we've thought about it, but we think that it's something to talk about, start the conversation. We'll see how the green building policy is, coming along and decide if we need to change it sooner. Okay, I see Kevin next.
So I second the point about we need to revisit the entire weights and make sure we agree with those weights. And we ought to have more flexibility here, including the idea of not even having the subcategory weights, but just use those as criteria. But the main point I wanted to raise is I think we want to make sure we do not reward paperwork exercises with good scores. So like I was looking at the DEI category, which is a pretty big number, and it looks like you create 2 pieces of paper and you get a good score for the DEI category. And that may not do anything for diversity and equity and inclusion. So I think we don't want to reward developers for hiring good lawyers to put together pretty paper. We want to hire concrete efforts to deal with climate change and energy conservation. Most of these measures are very, and I hate to use concrete because that's got bad connotations, but these are very specific and concrete criteria, which are appropriate. But I worry about the things that can be just gained by hiring good lawyers.
Sure.
I completely
just
agree.
to add a comment there, I think we have, and I think Joan was referring to too, there are several of the, particularly in the subcategories, you find things where you're basically seeing somebody drafting a document. That is the product. And that by itself doesn't necessarily produce a result. And, some of those might be candidates for removal. Or at least have anything you're going to draft like that have an action item that is part of it that you're going to do.
Thank you, Kevin and Mark. Doug, over to you, and then Jonathan and Joan.
I just want to thank Mark very much for pointing this out, and he's done an excellent analytical job here in pointing out the true percentage values of these different factors. And I know Mark's a cautious man. He doesn't want to get too far out ahead. I myself would not have been offended one bit if Mark had presented us with an alternative that makes a lot more sense to Mark with different criteria and different percentages. And it seems to me like it's definitely time to jump in sooner rather than later. I would not put anything off based on when the Green Building Incentive Program might or might not be ready for prime time. I feel like that's going to be many months, and this score sheet can be improved significantly, I suspect, much quicker than the GBIP is going to be improved. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks. I agree that improvements can definitely be made. I do want to note that this wasn't thrown together in a couple of weeks. We worked on this for quite a long time through multiple iterations. And if you can go back to the screen, please. And one of the challenges that when you start getting really into the details of putting together one is trying to make it as objective as possible, so that if I'm going to one building SPRC hearing and another person is going to a different one, that when we compare the scores, that we can try and consider that these, you're comparing apples to apples, and there definitively always ways to improve this. There was a lot of I think discussion around the DEI questions because yeah, these are evidently weak, and there were actually an improvement on what the discussion was around a previous iteration, not this one, I don't think, of the GBI program, which was that like somebody on the development team even needed to like give a class on DEI. So we were like trying to go one step further, even though even this was weak, I admit it. And with the GBI, we struggled around the idea of double assessing things, so that if by definition having a high GBI score, that implies by definition that you have met these wickets. Like, what's the added value of having those same wickets in the spreadsheet itself? So I think that, whether we keep this iteration or the next iteration of the the Green Building Incentive Program in there, that's something to keep in mind, that we're not just, replicating half of the GBI scorecard in this scorecard.
Right.
So these are all just things to keep in mind.
If I could just add, I think that's a really important point, because you do find situations, even in this version, where essentially, and stormwater is the one I think of here, this is the one that says, and this is for the yellow category, meets expectations. It basically says you have to comply with state law, which you kind of have to do anyway. and the other part of the process there is the county staff will have seen and decided whether there's compliance with the state and local law on stormwater before it comes to us. So that's a duplication that doesn't necessarily add much. And I think that's one of the policy issues for us to think about. Are we saying, let's take what is given in GBI or frankly just the code and say, we're not going to repeat that. We want to take it to a higher level. Maybe that means we do fewer things.
Right.
But that's at least something worth talking about.
So a couple things I just want to chime in on before Joan, I think, gets the last word. One is that I've heard that developers complain that we expect different things than what the county is expecting through GBI or through building codes, and that maybe we should add a preamble, because I absolutely think we should be doing that. But secondly, more importantly, Jonathan, we're absolutely standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of updating the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet, put C2E2 far ahead of other commissions. It is hard to make it. Someone who's done a bunch of these now, it is hard. I still feel like I'm being a little subjective, but at least there are standard criteria, and the more buildings I do, the more I can make it standard. But the work that was put into this, every other commission is jealous of this checklist, and this is why it's valuable to the county board. This is why they are. So absolutely, this was a huge, huge, huge step forward. Took a ton of work and amazes me. But, we've had it for several years and it's time to do it. And I also want to mention the last project that I did, which we approved at our last meeting, which was this townhouse development where, I did try to make it was an all electric building, no gas lines even coming to the property. They had done all of these things. Every single garage was, wired for EV. They had all these things and I could not get the score up. They got the full 15 points for DEI like everybody does, but I ended up writing a letter that said our score sheet doesn't, it said in there, this isn't totally apples and oranges to other projects because it's a different project. So it's going to be hard to have one document that really makes sense for everything. But I think this was a great attempt to do that. And it really has stood us in good stead. Okay, Joan, yours is the last hand I see.
Again, I mean, this was a good step forward, and we need to kind of build on this because it really does make things. But it's thinking is maybe one of the things we need to start with is come up with kind of our definition of what a good sustainability building should be. Is just what are the key categories, and we might want to actually be a bit more specific and transparent of how we're rating different categories and making clear as to what we're kind of what we're looking for, and have a criteria that I think we may or may not diverge more from the GBI. Again, we kind of use that as the baseline. If you participated in the GBIP, then you usually got kind of that low passing score. But I think there's opportunity, but I think, kind of stepping back and saying, what are the key categories? What would a building look like to excel that we'd like to see all buildings have? And then, kind of step back from there in terms of what is the absolute minimum that we would expect. I mean, I'm actually coming to the point is a building that isn't fully electrified just fails. So there's some things to thinking about that. The other thing we might want to do is we elaborate is reach out to some of the other commissions who are thinking about doing these checklists and where they actually overlap with sustainability, like Parks and Forestry and Natural Resources and Parks and Rec, who also kind of look at the biophilic elements is, if we have a similar criteria that we can all work from, I think that would kind of help everybody all around.
Certainly help the developers. Thank you, Joan. Well, I think, Mark, by popular acclaim, you will be involved in this next step. but if anyone else is interested or willing in looking at this, just email me or in the chat. We struggle with the open public meeting rule with small committees, but I think to Doug's point, we absolutely have to come. This was a great first start, a wonderful conversation, but I think we absolutely have to come back with a straw man or whatever the corporate speak is for people to talk about. But it's great to get some initial thoughts. Did I just see a chat go by? I don't know, Scott, but that's something to think about in terms of your question in the chat.
Yes, we did. We when we were building this, sorry, I think.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I think that was directed to me. I mean, we did at the time have, long conversations. John Bloom noted. We had long conversations about this. This was we went over this multiple times during meetings, and we definitely did ask for input from the staff at the time. I think it was Joan Kelch who was the primary lead that we would have been working with. I could be wrong on that, but we definitely did take input from air staff at the time.
So thank you for that. Mark, thank you very much, because you've been emailing me and saying, is it supposed to work like this? And I've, this is happening, that's happening. And it's great to have the background. It's great to have many people on the commission who were here when this was developed to add some explanations to those of us who are newer. So really appreciate it. Thank you, Mark, for starting this conversation. So now, since we've gone a little bit out of order, I think our next thing is the Green Building Incentive Policy Letter, which we talked about at our last. So at our last meeting, we had a couple of different takes on ways that we could comment, and including some from Doug and from Joan. So Doug, Joan, and I have worked on a new draft, which you all have, and without ever meeting together, but doing lots of emails and lots of one-on-one phone calls in a three-way circle. So I think I appreciated the comments on the letter that I saw earlier today from people who had time to comment on it. I think from a substantive, I think there are three real issues substantively that I'd like to get people's sense on. One is whether we want, to the point that Joan just made, that if you're not all electric, you fail, whether we want to take the position that all new construction should be fully electric, or if we want to be a little more mousy about it, fully electric except for a backup generator or something like that. But that's where I see a lot of people saying they need, for resiliency, they have to have the backup gas generator. But that's one question, all electric for new construction. The current proposal, that is the current GBIP proposal, has some lower tiers where you could still get some incentives, even if you were a new construction, not fully. So I'm going to so the other questions I'd like to talk about. So that's one. We heard from Paul Roman, who I think has joined us on our last call, about the problems of having existing buildings who participate going all electric. And I think we were persuaded. So we're not looking to make existing buildings all electric. So new buildings, all electric is one. Whether in conversions, this new adaptive reuse pathway that the county is very interested in because of the number of vacant office space that we have now. So office to residential conversions, if they put in new systems, not if they don't, but if they, because these are existing buildings, but if they put in new systems, the thought is they might need to put in a lot of new systems because the conversion from office to residential is pretty radical. Like they might need to put in individual heat pumps in people's offices, in people's new homes. If they do that, should that new systems be fully electric? So that's question 2 for adaptive reuse. And question 3, well, let's start with those two. So those are related about electrification for buildings. So I will open, before we go in through the letter, I will open the, I'd like a sense of what people think. John?
I think my position's been pretty clear is, you know, we need to really insist on electrification. I mean, inclusion of on-site fossil fuel use is just should be a non-starter. These are buildings that will essentially build in those infrastructures for the next 15, 20 years. And we've got 25 years to go to carbon neutrality, and we need to actually be making huge progress in the next few years if we're going to come anywhere close to meeting the targets that the scientists are saying. So for me, and for adaptive reuse projects, you know, it is so radical that what they're doing is they have to put in all new systems. So in that case, they should be electric. So to me, I think that's something that we kind of hold on. I mean, there's a little bit of gray area is, I know there's always the pushback on the retail is that retailers, you know, for restaurants want to have gas. However, you know, we ran into that with Amazon for Met Place, is that they were allowing gas in the retail, and I think it was the same in Penn Place. But when they finished Met Park, all of those restaurants, everything is electric. There is no gas there, so they were able to find retailers that would go with all electric kitchens. So I think you know that's
great. Thank you, Joan. I think you're right on that. It's manageable. Jonathan.
I know technologically, absolutely. And can it be cost effective? Yes. But one question I have is, and I mean, it's almost a rhetorical question, is what are the builders going to do? And if we anticipate that 60%, 30% were, no matter what we do for an incentive, are ever going to do what we want them to do. 30%, this might incentivize them to go fully electric. But 30%, if we gave them a median step, they would take it. But if we don't give them a median step, they're not going to do anything that we want them to do. Is there some sort of thing that could act as a double incentive? I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know, have a celebration where the county actively advertises on behalf of the buildings that go all the way. If we're going to say you need to go 100% electric, and there is no other way that you can get an incentive, is that going to discourage people from going halfway? I don't know, but maybe we should sweeten the pot for going halfway, perhaps with non-monetary things, such as actively promoting those buildings, those properties, those developers that do.
Right. I think Jamie was mentioning that at the beginning, having the supernova program for where you get to brand your building as a supernova project. And we're also saying, trying to come up with creative things like expedited permitting. You get to skip the beloved SPRC process. So definitely agree, sweetening the pot with all kinds of things. And I know that a lot of developers have given feedback, and there's also proposed a 6-month outreach period starting with when the policy is adopted to outreach to developers. And so I think there'll be some iterative process as we learn, but I think that you're right about all of that, Jonathan. Melissa, and then Rob and Joe. Melissa.
Thank you. Very small comment. Generally, I agree with Joan that the push should be for full electrification, but I think having, gas backup generators for resiliency makes total sense. We don't know how the grid is going to handle huge increases, and I don't think that should be a major detractor. That's it.
Yeah, I think we did work in the appendix too to actually have some of the infrastructure in place for backup batteries, which actually will provide a lot more resiliency and grid balancing than diesel backups. So again, there's nuances and gray areas that I don't see that we should stick hard on, but those would be the real stretch categories of that's the most exceptional building is if it is all electric, even to the point of backup capabilities and that.
Thanks, Melissa. Rob.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree with Joan in principle, but I also agree with Jonathan that, and this is why I've been pressing for what are the developers saying, because this policy does no good if no one pursues it and no one takes it up. If we can have a great policy and we don't have, this is not about passing a regulatory mandate because we don't have that authority. This is about incentivizing builders. And I was looking at the history of Arlington GVIP on their public presentation. It looks like in 2019 we had 13 buildings that that were constructed under the green building incentive policy and 3 that weren't. And then in 2020, 6 that met the policy and 2 that didn't. So, we're getting about 2/3 of the builders taking up the current policy, which right now is not that aggressive, and a third not taking it up. And so if we make it that much more aggressive without any outs or compromise language, will we get zero uptake of it? That's my concern, and that's why I really want to see what the builders are saying. And I haven't seen a place where we have the builders' commentary on what they were willing to take up. I mean, there's a lot of outreach from, here's what the policy could be and here's what it is, and we'll take your comments on it. But I haven't seen if the builder says, if you put this in here, there's no way I'm going to follow this policy. I'm going to build a non-green building. That's I think the data set that we really need. It's hard to do that in advance, and you have to take everything a builder is going to say with a grain of salt. But it's also, if we present the options and how they can meet this and all the technical assistance on how they can fully electrify, but also provide some outs for the minor, like Melissa just said, backup power or whatever else, we may get more uptake of the policy and move us more in the direction, as Jonathan said, that we want them to go without totally alienating and not getting any uptake of the policy. Thanks, over.
Thanks, Rob. Joe.
Yeah, so I guess pushing back a little bit on that is that, first of all, I think 2/3 is a pretty good success rate, considering this is an incentive and not a minimum building standard. So if the goal was to get 100%, we might as well just hand out cash in the street, because it would be the same kind of thing of just setting a weak standard so everyone can meet it. So I do agree with the 100% to electrified buildings. I think this day and age, it's kind of a standard, especially building buildings for the next 30 years. I mean, today's new builds are tomorrow's retrofits. So you could very well see it being more costly in the future for them to have to come back and redo it when the market does not make sense at all for gas buildings that use natural gas. But I also like the idea of putting the exclusion for the backup generators, because I see that a lot within the commercial space. So it's pretty standardized to have that backup generators, even when it's all electrified. So in professional life, work with leased commercial spaces that are all electric besides that backup generator. So it does work with that caveat. So that's kind of what would be my position.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Somebody's got their hand up and who's just identified as guest. So who is that? And remember,
are you seeing me?
I see you as number 2, but I see number 1 ahead of you.
Demetra.
Oh,
I think it might be me sending.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and I can't see everybody that's on right now, but assuming that Paul is still with us, I want him to certainly correct me if I'm misstating. But our understanding is that pure electrification from the developers is meeting a not insignificant amount of resistance. Paul, are you still with us?
Yeah, sorry, my mic was not on there. That's accurate, Demetra. From the developers that we've met with and spoken to, there has been pushback regarding building electrification. There's been discussion, and it's out there through case studies, and developers are looking at it through their own portfolios. When you're dealing with building electrification, even in new construction, it can potentially lower your greenhouse gas emissions. It does depend on the grid and how clean it is, but that does not necessarily mean that there's going to be a result in a reduction in energy use within that building. It's not just about putting in efficient systems within your building, or putting on solar on your rooftop to cover your utilities. It deals with battery storage. It deals with your building envelope, which is your most efficient building system when you're dealing with energy efficiency. So you're looking at no thermal bridging, you're looking at higher insulation, you're looking at higher, more efficient glazing. You're looking at, as I mentioned before, when you're dealing with solar on your rooftop, if there's battery backup storage, is that feasible with the space on a rooftop? There's different scenarios that are built in, and I'm just speaking from an architectural perspective, but these are the issues that have been brought up from developers and the pushback that we've been receiving regarding building electrification.
Thank you, Paul and Demetra. So we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to ask people to speak as briefly as they can while still making their points. So Joan and then Jonathan.
I think on the electrification is on the SPRC processes I've been involved with over the last year or two. They're all coming forward with energy modeling that actually includes pathways to electrification. So they're all looking at it and thinking about it. And the thing is, once you put in a gas system, you cannot lower your greenhouse gas emissions. But if you've got an all-electric system, as the grid greens, you're lowering your greenhouse gas emissions. The more important is, kind of the way I look at this is that we should establish the standards that we think are important. What the other part of that equation is what the incentives are. And in structuring the incentives is actually, I'd like to see, almost any new building and probably some of the adaptive reuse go the climate adaptation pathway. Work with FIAS, work with International Future Living Institute at the beginning, because we've heard a number of times from developers is that if you design from the beginning, you can do it. It doesn't cost that much more. It's just a matter of getting them thinking. So, and then to Rob's point, and I think we've tried to build that in, but we need the feedback from the developers, and maybe going ahead without all of the incentives fully, kind of baked in. At least start talking to them to figure out is what would work for them and what's the most, and then maybe within 6 months they could start to refine this so that they can come up with a package that makes it attractive for people to not just meet the minimum in the green building incentive policy, but actually step forward, particularly on energy efficiency and of course electrification.
Can I ask a clarifying question, because I just want to make sure that I'm understanding? Are we talking about electrification for everything, all three pathways, new building, existing buildings, and adaptive
we're
reuse?
just talking about
two of them.
New building, and for adaptive reuse, we're talking about new systems in adaptive reuse buildings, which I've heard very different things. I've heard people say that for these office to residential conversions, they won't be using new systems. They'll just be, one big heating and air conditioning system, and individual units won't have. I'm sure it's going to vary widely and wildly on these conversions. They're technologically challenging. But so we're talking about new construction, and we're talking about new systems in adaptive reuse office to residential. We're not talking about existing buildings.
Although ideally, we'd actually like them, at least as they're going through this process, to be thinking about it.
Yes, we would.
Yeah.
And,
Okay, the one
yeah.
other thing that I just wanted to raise is that what we've heard in our discussions with NAOP, with, you know, the workshops, and then in the interviews with individual developers, is that for new buildings, a lot of the new buildings are really being targeted for the National Landing, Crystal City area, and giving additional FAR bonus density is not compelling for them because they're
Right.
too near the airport. So they can't even, in most of the cases, even utilize the bonus density.
So streamline permitting, some of it, you know,
Yeah,
all of those things that you've, I know. Okay, Jonathan.
Yeah, Joan mentioned this, but from the very first SPRC meeting I went to, I had a project developer tell me the carbon footprint of the grid is the you know, the massive controlling factor, and so can make a fully electric building tremendously more dirty than those that use natural gas, which is kind of really ridiculous, considering that in the time that I've been sitting on these committees, Virginia has dropped the percentage of coal to, I believe, 0 in the state. Like the Dominion grid, the amount of the amount of carbon that the grid uses every year drops, and it's you know, all the other stuff about insulation. Yes, true. There's a lot of other factors other than electrification, but it's not a really strong argument to say, oh, well, the grid could make the building way dirtier than if you use natural gas on site. I mean, that's just not a really good argument.
Yeah, Jonathan, but you're absolutely right. If everyone was going to meet the RPS, but they're really clear about they're not going to meet the RPS, and even FERC, you know, seemed to give direction to PJM that said they were kind of fine with that. And especially in Virginia, where the data centers are just escalating. I mean, we're talking about doubling the entire demand in 10 to, you know, 13 years. So
guys, we're gonna have to wrap this up. So Kevin, you have your hand up. I mean, not the whole thing, but this electrification question. Kevin, you're on mute.
No, I'm off mute. Okay. The only thing I want to make is in all the Energy Commission meetings, Scott Sklar is always talking about geothermal and other things. And I want to make sure if that is viable for anything in Arlington, is that captured by electrification? That's just direct heat transfer, isn't it? So I want to
use electricity. It uses it's considered, part of it. Yeah.
But it's not fossil fuels. So we're saying we want electricity. So geothermal would be included in that.
Okay. I just thought it was actually direct heat transfer. I didn't know it was actually generating electricity when you had.
It's not generating, it's using electricity to pump the heat. It's considered part of electrification.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure in pushing for electrification, we don't wipe out other green sources.
We actually might want to consider that as part of our checklist update, is that's a stretch of a building that actually puts in geothermal, because it's actually much more efficient.
It exceeds, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have this letter. We've got various changes. I think that all the wording changes that we can see that Joan, Doug, and I can make. When we were talking about the additional changes, I really was referring to the additional changes from the existing green building. Doug is right that there haven't been changes since this proposal, since we've been talking about this proposal starting in March. So I think The wording
Cindy,
changes
I
here
did
are
try to
fine.
change the language to account for what Doug was pointing
Okay.
out. So
Right. So I think the wording changes are all fine with the authors. So the question is whether the content is something that the commission is ready to support. And this letter does call for electrification. We can add something about, you know, I know I had in an early draft, I had electrification except for things, wherever, where I tried to write in something for the, oh, hi, Elizabeth. I tried to write in something for the backup generators, and we can try again to do that. But that in general, electrification. And Doug, over to you. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. A couple days ago, I put in a question about one of the very last sentences in the next to last paragraph. If you can scroll up on this letter, it's really tiny. But I can't quite see it. If you keep going up more, no, I'm sorry, down. Down. Toward the end of the letter, there was a paragraph about the staff's plan to, they're highlighted in yellow. So it just, that letter, that sentence seemed to assume that the thing was going to be approved. And there's no, if we're saying that the board should not take this up or the board should not approve it, then I don't know if we need this sentence that says one aspect of this is good. The aspect being the community outreach, developer feedback.
I think that to your question about whether we're asking the board to vote this proposal down, I think this letter does not take a position on that. It says, here's the proposal, here's what we would like to see, here are the things and it doesn't say, so vote down the current proposal or spend more time. We don't know if other changes will be made. What I did hear from Susan Cunningham, the county board member who is our liaison, is that she thought, as we've mentioned a couple of times, the idea of getting it out there and, getting it moving, getting this outreach period to developers and then refining, which I think we do say at the top, refining. I know there's over the next 6 to 12 months. I know there's concern that when the original GBIP was passed and we said it'll be refined in 2 years and now it's been 5 years, but I think that this is a little different. I know we have a lot of players and we have a pretty new county board. We'll have a majority new county board starting in January. So I think it could play out differently.
I did try to change the language on that. It says, we'd like to see the minimum requirements change, but let's not get it perfect. Let's get it out there so that we can get the feedback and then actually iterative and fairly rapid, especially what's the first, within 6 months is, if this is going to fall flat or if we've got some really good feedback that, this is what it'll take for us to go along these pathways. Then that's.
I can see now that you fixed my concern, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. And I just did that this afternoon. So
are there I know there's a lot going on in the chat, but are there other things? Is there any last comment people would like to make? I think we should be getting ready to vote on this letter. Public comment stops today. We've gotten, our special commission dispensation to put in our public comment tomorrow. But this is, if we want to get this letter on the record before, we're not sure exactly when the county board is going to take it up. I know we've discussed at the previous meeting whether there'll be a request to advertise or whether the board will go straight through. And thanks to Mitra for your advice on that. If we want to be on the record, today is this meeting, which is our second meeting discussing that, is really our chance. So I'm just skimming through. So any comments? Are there any comments before any? Doug, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have no problem with this letter. I think this letter and the other letters that are going to be going out from other environmental groups will lead to this matter not being put before the county board anytime soon.
So there'll be time to make these changes. Any other comments? Okay, Could I have a motion to approve this letter? I think Joan and Doug probably want to move and not put words. Melissa, did you have a comment? Not to put words in Joan and Doug's mouth, but I'd love to see them move in second because they've worked so hard on this.
I move to approve this letter.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Anybody?
I'll
Great.
second that motion.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm just checking chats and things. I have too many things on the screen. All in favor, raise your hand and I'll look through all the pages. Okay, I see not everybody has their hand up, and not everybody has their screen on. So let me go the other way and ask the question. I see lots of good hands. Now, if you would like to vote against this letter, please put your hand up and I'll look for you. But if you don't have your camera on, no matter how hard I look, I won't see you. Okay, I think that this is passed. I don't see any negative votes. And I see a lot of positive votes. So thank you to everyone who worked on this letter and to everybody for all of their thoughtful comments. I think, including the discussion we had with Mark too on the SPRC, it's been it's been a meeting which we've raised a lot of issues that I think will really help us. So thank you all. Any last comments before we go to the updates? Okay, so SPRCs, I know Joe has been to the River House SPRC meeting and reported back on that. Is there anything else? It's the first of 5, yes, 5 on River House. So anybody has to say about any SPRCs? Joe, did you want to say anything this was your practice, and by now maybe you've been to an SPRC hearing on Pentagon 2, I don't know.
Yeah, so I was just at one on Thursday for the hotels, the hotel conversion to some multifamily and row homes. That one's very interesting because it's right next to a historical church and historical cemetery, and so there's a lot of cultural significance with the redevelopment. So they're trying to navigate a lot of that. But the River House one, I think they said it might be the most well attended since the Amazon initiative. There was over 70 people there, a lot of passionate arguments all around. So I think that'll be a fun one to watch.
Thank you. I think that's the only sign up if I'm leaving somebody. Thanks to we sent out the dates for the 2025 calendar year meetings, and then Jenna very nicely sent out actual appointments. So thank you, Jenna, for each of them. Doug and Elizabeth from the Energy Committee, is there any update you guys would like to share?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share basically what happened at the last meeting last Wednesday, and I'll be very brief, but I'm happy to answer further questions offline if people are interested. We heard from Steve Burr of the AIR team about the EVS charging landscape. They've put in a whole bunch of EV chargers in county facilities. There was a rate ordinance that updated the amount charged at county EV chargers from 14 cents to 17 cents. And I believe it went through yesterday. I haven't heard it did not, so I would assume it did. They're putting off an ordinance about whether you can actually get a ticket for parking an ICE vehicle in an EV spot because there's some zoning issues involved there that are sort of thorny. But the staff is working on that. Staff is also working on more EV chargers in more county facilities going forward in 2025. So at the Energy Committee, we thought that was great. We also heard from Dr. Gwen McCrae, who's the Environmental Justice Coordinator for the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. And she gave us a little primer on environmental justice that was very helpful. We did talk about the Green Building Incentive Program at the Energy Committee meeting. And then another interesting thing that not all people may be aware of is there's been some talk about the county board passing some sort of a climate resolution in some form. I don't know if it would say that climate is an emergency or just what, but it would tend to focus public attention on the climate issues here in Arlington and show that the county board is aware of it. And the Chief Climate Officer, Jen Fioretti, has been tasked with coming up with a climate action plan for the county that might be based in some or large part on this climate resolution that the board would pass. So I think that's going to be an upcoming issue that we should all pay attention to and look at the actual language of this resolution if it does move forward. And then the climate action plan that staff will be working on over the next several months will drive climate policies in Arlington for the next several years. So that's an interesting issue that we're going to stay on top of. So thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And Jennifer's here. And yes, climate change resolution is on the update list. So we at C2E2 are tracking it too. And we'll see where it goes. CPACE was something we heard a update on either the last meeting or the meeting before, I think the September meeting. And I understand there's been some action. Demetra, do you want to talk about that?
The update was adopted by the board.
Yes. Yay.
Yes. So
thank you. You can keep going, but yeah, that was the good news that since it was presented on, it's been adopted by the board.
Mm-hmm.
Solid Waste Committee. The Solid Waste Committee is a committee of C2E2 in the same way the Energy Committee is. But after the Solid Waste Master Plan was passed about a year ago, the committee hasn't met for a year. But it is meeting again this week, and I will attend on behalf of C2E2, so I'll report back on that. And if anybody here has incredible passion for solid waste, let me know. So we mentioned this is Demetra's last meeting, which I'm very sad about. And Demetra, I don't know if I know you did this at the Energy Committee, but can you give us a little update on staff transition plans? And I know others are here too. Yes, thank you, Jonathan, for your chat.
I wish I had more detail to give you right now. That transition is a work in progress with leadership. You all have a kind of summary. There's another matrix that has more detail that, of course, the leadership is looking at, but you do have the basic. There's a tab 1 and a tab 2 in that Excel sheet. The first one is projects, programs, and initiatives. And the second sheet is really, budget. It's the legislative review that's coming up in the session. It's dealing with the county attorney's office, drafting board reports, representation on initiatives such as the update to the comp plan. And the sustainability and resiliency lens on that. So right now, they've posted the solicitation to seek my replacement. But with the holidays and everything, I think they probably won't get a chance to even look at those submissions until early next year. So I don't have any detail really about staff capacity and how that corresponds to, what is all on that Excel sheet and capacity and the gaps.
Right, but you've put together a list of the projects that need to be picked up and thoughts on all of that, and we really appreciate that. And you gave a lot of notice, and we really, we're not the county, but we really appreciate that too.
There may be some that they just can't do. There may be.
Right. Well, that's why it's good to have the list so we can see, but I'm sure it will be, you're leaving big shoes to fill, and there'll definitely be a hiccup. And I know you have a great team, and some of whom are on the phone, but yeah. So anyway, thank you for everything you've done. I think that was that's all of the things that I know about. Any other updates from anyone, for the good of the order. The chat is getting more and more interesting, so.
I'll just note that the ordinance
right.
on deer management passed on Saturday too, so.
Right, and thank you, Joan. And you testified not only on deer management, our letter about, which was in support of the staff plan, which is what was passed, despite some community opposition that we took the other side of, but also you testified on our legislative priorities letter at the county board meeting on Saturday. So
yeah,
thank you for doing
commissions
that.
were making comments, so I was there. I figured I might as well. But as usual, they summarized our 3-page letter into 3/4 of a page. That gives it a high level. Pardon?
That's not bad. 3/4 of a page. I feel pretty good about that. So.
Yeah, no, it's kind of standard. It catches the general spirit of what we said. And as I said, you know, the letter actually is much for the county board members and staff to lay out all the issues. I did talk a bit about the importance of paying attention to utility level changes, kind of the data centers, building out more distributed virtual power plants, paying attention to how the ratepayers get treated in all these issues and making sure that they actually get the lowest cost coming to them. But, you know, that was, I didn't really, no point in going over all the details in ours.
Great. Well, thank you. And I think it was one last update I want to mention that I see Alex has joined us. Alex was the new commissioner who was appointed in time for last month's meeting, but wasn't able to attend. And I didn't see him until now. So Alex, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us how you pronounce your last name? Would be helpful.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, my last name is pronounced Rowe. R-O-E. Yeah. And yeah, I hail from Fairfax County, just right over, you know, next door, and had kind of a storied environmental activist career there. I was in a BBC documentary that was about data center sustainability. So data centers is definitely one of the key issues that I've been involved with over the years. And yeah, I've just moved to Arlington, so happy to get started on this committee and work with all of you.
And to hear, we've heard along this meeting about trying to take regional approaches and involve other community, other Northern Virginia communities. So the fact that you've been active in other Northern Virginia communities is something that I think you can really help us with. So, so welcome, and
thank you.
You've got a chat message from Jonathan. So I feel like we should be sharing our personal email addresses in code somehow, but however you guys want to do it. Anyway, because this is an open public meeting being recorded. And with that, is there anything else we should talk about before we adjourn at 9:00 in a miracle? All right. Well, thank you all for all of the participation. Even though I cut you all off, I really value your participation, I swear. And I will see you all soon. Yes, and thank you, Kevin, for your chat note. Thank you all.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thanks, Cindy.